Revolution. The word itself usually rings with the promise of justice, a cleansing fire against tyranny. But sometimes that fire turns into something far more vile, a darkness that doesn't just burn down regimes, but reaches in and devours the human soul itself. In October of 1793, while Paris still reeked of blood and smoke from the slaughter of the aristocracy, a woman sat alone in a damp stone cell inside the conciergerie, a place already infamous as the waiting room of death. Her name was Marie Antoinette, once Queen of France, now reduced to a number, prisoner 280. Every title, every shred of dignity, every layer of protection, music her crown had once given her, had been ripped away. History remembers her execution, the guillotine that severed her head on October 16th. But the chilling truth is this: Marie Antoinette died long before that blade ever fell. She died slowly, agonizingly, piece by piece, inside a cell that became the stage for her methodical destruction. So, what really happened in those 76 days between her arrival at the concierge on August 2nd and her final walk to the scaffold? The answer isn't found in noble speeches or revolutionary manifestos. It hides instead in fragile letters from guards, in secret diaries of witnesses, and in official records that France kept sealed for music more than 2 centuries. This is not the story of a queen calmly accepting her fate. This is the documented chronicle of systematic humiliation, psychological torture, and a pervasive degradation music dressed up as revolutionary justice. Marie Antoinette was not simply executed, she was erased. Her humanity was deliberately dismantled before her body ever reached the guillotine. Imagine being for a time the most powerful woman in Europe, palaces spreading out beneath your feet, kings and ambassadors bowing in your presence, entire nations shifting because of your marriage, your alliances, your whims. And then in one violent historical heartbeat, everything music is torn away, not just your crown and your wealth, but your children, your freedom, your very name, and finally the most basic dignity of simply being treated like a human being. That was the fate of Marie Antoinette, and the revolutionaries of Paris knew exactly how to choreograph each step of her descent, ensuring maximum suffering. On August 2nd, 1793, she was taken from her relatively bearable confinement in the Temple Tower and transferred to the notorious conciergerie. Officially, this move was for security reasons after the discovery of a failed royalist escape attempt, but the truth was far more political and far more cruel. The revolution needed a spectacle. To give the people that spectacle, they first had to transform Marie Antoinette into something they could hate, not pity. The temple, with its relative privacy, still allowed her too much dignity, too much humanity. The concierge would correct that mistake. This was not just any prison. This medieval fortress on the banks of the Seine was dark, wet, and crawling with rats. It was infamous as the music last stop before the guillotine. Hundreds had gone in and never come out alive.
The cell prepared for Marie Antoinette was number 12. It measured barely 3 square meters. The walls were blackened with music mold.
The stone floor was permanently cold, forever damp from the moisture that seeped up from the sand flowing beneath the building. Her entire world was reduced to a narrow iron bed, a fragile wooden chair, a chamber pot, and a single flickering candle. The window was barred and set so high in the wall that she couldn't see outside. It allowed only the faintest, sickly shaft of light, just enough to hint whether it was day or night. But the physical misery was only the beginning. The revolutionaries understood something very clearly. True degradation doesn't come just from discomfort. It comes from stripping a person of privacy, of dignity, and of control over their own body. So Marie Antoinette was placed under constant surveillance 24 hours a day. And this was not discreet observation from outside the cell. 2 armed revolutionary guards were ordered to live and sleep inside that tiny space with her. According to the records of the prison's director, François Bolt, these guards were instructed to document everything she did. Every movement, every breath, every gesture, every moment, day and night, was to be observed and reported. She could not wash herself. could not change her clothes, could not relieve herself without their eyes on her. Contemporary accounts speak of her desperate pleas for a curtain, a screen, anything that might give her a sliver of privacy. Every request was coldly denied. The official excuse was security. The real reason, of course, was deliberate humiliation. Imagine the psychological torment of never being alone, not for a second, of knowing that whatever you do, however intimate, however degrading, is being watched, judged, and silently recorded. Marie Antoinette, who had once moved freely through vast palaces with hundreds of servants at her command, could no longer perform the most basic human functions without an audience. This was not a simple security measure. It was a calculated strategy to break her mind before her trial even began. The revolutionaries knew that a broken woman at the scaffold was far more useful than a dignified queen. The people had to see her crushed, humiliated, defeated, pitiful. The indignities did not end with constant surveillance. Inside that damp, mouldy cell, her health deteriorated rapidly. She suffered from chronic bleeding worsened by immense stress and the appalling conditions. Most likely, she was in the advanced stages of uterine cancer. She received virtually no proper medical care. Her white undergarments had to be changed frequently, music because of the bleeding. Even this necessity became a tool of systematic degradation. According to the memoirs of Rosalie Morier, one of the few female attendants allowed to care for her, every change of clothing had to be carried out in front of the male guards. The former Queen of France was forced to remove, wash and change her blood-stained underclothes under the eyes of strangers. Rosalie describes how Marie Antoinette tried again and again to preserve what little modesty she could. She would turn her back to the guards, retreat to a corner, and attempt music to shield herself from their gaze. But even that small act of self-protection was sometimes denied. On several occasions, the guards demanded that she strip completely naked in front of them under the flimsy pretext of checking whether she carried hidden weapons or escape plans. This was not security. This was sexualized violence, barely disguised as revolutionary duty. The guards commented on her body. They laughed at her condition. They treated the former Queen of France with the same contempt they reserve for a common criminal, perhaps worse. Each humiliation, EAC. Forced exposure was recorded not as a scandal, but as proof of the revolution's absolute control over her. The dehumanization continued relentlessly. Her hair, once her pride, meticulously styled and powdered according to the fashion of Versailles, was now neglected, stray with grey, and falling out in clumps under the combined assault of music, stress, malnutrition and disease. She lost weight rapidly. Her face grew hollow, her skin so pale it seemed almost translucent. Meanwhile, revolutionary newspapers' music printed cruel caricatures, portraying her as an ugly, depraved witch, a grotesque monster that bore little resemblance to the dying woman in cell 12. The goal was clear. The French public must not see Marie Antoinette as a suffering human being. They had to see her as the living embodiment of evil, someone who deserved every ounce of torment she received. The most atrocious degradation arrived with her trial, which began on October 14, 1793. This was never a genuine legal proceeding. It was theatre, carefully staged, tightly controlled, and utterly predetermined. The verdict had been decided long before Marie Antoinette ever entered the courtroom. She was charged not only with conspiring against the revolution, but with something far more shocking, far more grotesque. The accusation that she had sexually abused her own son, 8-year-old Louis Charles. The charge was entirely fabricated. It was based solely on a confession extracted from the terrified child after months of isolation, music manipulation, and brutality at the hands of his captors. Even within the Revolutionary Tribunal, some members reportedly recoiled. The accusation was so vile, so openly inhuman, that it caused visible discomfort in the room. But discomfort did not stop it. The charge was read aloud publicly before a jeering, bloodthirsty crowd. People who had been carefully conditioned to see Marie Antoinette not as a mother, not as a woman, but as a monster. The intention was absolute. Annihilation of her moral standing. There would be no sympathy left to cling to. Imagine the situation. A mother forcibly separated from her children, imprisoned for months in a damp cell, dying slowly from a disease eating her from the inside. And now she stands before a packed music courtroom, accused of committing the most unthinkable crime a mother could ever commit. For a moment, just one moment, something remarkable happened. Marie Antoinette turned away from her accusers, and music faced the women in the audience. Her voice, weak but steady, cut through the noise, and she spoke words that history would remember. "I appeal to all mothers present. Is such an accusation even possible?" For an instant the courtroom fell silent. It was a fragile, fleeting silence, but it was real. In that moment, stripped of her crown, her titles, and nearly her life, she reclaimed a sliver of her humanity. Not as a queen, but as a mother. The machinery of the revolution could not allow that. The silence shattered. The trial pressed on with renewed cruelty. Over the course of 2 days, Marie Antoinette was interrogated for more than 16 exhausting hours. She was given no real rest. She was weak from hunger, dizzy from blood loss, barely able to stand. None of it mattered. On October 15th, after this music-grotesque parody of justice, she was sentenced to death by guillotine. The verdict shocked no one, but the manner in which it would be carried out contained one final calculated humiliation. Unlike her husband Louis XVI, who had been transported to his execution in a closed carriage, Marie Antoinette was denied even that small mercy. She was ordered to be taken through Paris in an open cart. This was deliberate. The people needed to see her, to mock her, to spit at her, to reassure themselves that the once powerful queen was now nothing more than a broken criminal. Her hands were tied tightly behind her back like a common offender. Her hair, once legendary throughout Europe, was roughly cut off. What remained was uneven, crude, and grey. She was dressed in a plain white shift, already stained with sweat and blood. On the morning of October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette began her final journey. Witnesses described a woman barely recognizable as the radiant queen who had once dazzled courts across the continent. Her face was sunken, her eyes appeared hollow, distant, her body was bent with pain and exhaustion. Music, and yet, even now she tried to hold on to the last fragments of dignity left to her. She sat upright in the cart. She kept her head raised. She refused to meet the eyes of the screaming crowd that lined the streets. Some hurled insults, others laughed. Some followed the cart for blocks, eager to savor every second of her humiliation. When she reached the scaffold, she climbed the steps herself, slowly, carefully, without protest. Accounts from that morning describe music and eerie stillness about her, not defiance, not resignation, something. Closer to exhaustion, so complete it bordered on peace. As she stepped onto the platform, she accidentally trod on the foot of the executioner, Charles Sanson. Her final recorded words were not curses, not pleas, not bitterness. "Pardon me, sir, I did not do it on purpose, courtesy right to the end." A small, almost unbearable moment of humanity in a world that had stripped her of nearly all of it. At precisely noon, the blade fell. Her head was lifted and shown to the roaring crowd. Her body was discarded without ceremony into an unmarked grave alongside dozens of other victims of the guillotine. The revolution moved on, but her suffering did not end there. For more than 2 centuries, the full details of what Marie Antoinette endured inside the Concierge remained sealed in the French National Archives. The records were considered too disturbing, too shameful, too revealing to be made public. It was not until 1989, during the bicentennial of the French Revolution, that historians finally began to release the complete documents. Among them were the long-suppressed memoirs of Rosalie Morier, the raw and unsettling diaries of the guards, and the chilling official reports written by the director of the Concierge himself. What these documents revealed was devastating. Marie Antoinette's suffering was not an unfortunate byproduct of revolutionary justice. It was not chaos. It was not neglect. It was a deliberate, systematic campaign of psychological and, yes, sexual torture. Its purpose was singular and brutally clear: to transform a powerful woman into a pitiful object, something the French populace could despise without guilt, something no longer recognizable as fully human. The revolutionaries understood instinctively what modern psychology would later define as systematic dehumanization.
If you want people to accept atrocities, you must first strip the victim of their humanity.
Marie Antoinette was dehumanized through relentless propaganda, but more importantly, through every moment of her 76 days of captivity. Every forced exposure, every denial of basic dignity, every invasion of her body and privacy was a deliberate step in her erasure.
So the question remains, why? Why wasn't the swift blade of the guillotine enough?
Why did Marie Antoinette have to be destroyed psychologically before being destroyed physically? The answer lies at the very heart of revolutionary power. The French Revolution spoke grandly of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But its leaders understood that true power does not come merely from killing enemies. It comes from breaking them, from degrading them completely, from turning them into living warnings. Marie Antoinette was more than a woman. She was a symbol, and symbols they believed had to be obliterated in every conceivable way.